It's tough to hear criticism, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't matter who you are or how justified it may or may not be. None of us likes to hear someone say, hey, you know what? I don't think you're living up to your potential, or I think you need to make a course correction, or I think, there's a part of your life that's a little off track and maybe you should try something else or do something better. Let's just be real. None of us really like that, right? It's not something, I just hope someone can give me some critical feedback today. That would just be wonderful. We don't live that way in our lives. Sometimes though, how many of us know, sometimes we need to hear it. Now, sometimes people are just mean and they're just have an axe to grind and they'll say things to us that really aren't justified. And we have to learn how to kind of let that slide and okay, whatever, buddy. But sometimes we need to hear from people, maybe something is messed up. Maybe I am doing something that's not good. Maybe I do need someone to kind of speak into my life and help me switch gears a little bit. Sometimes it is necessary. Sometimes it is something we have to, as hard as it is, accept. But what about the times when we need to be the person to say something? What about the times when you and I find ourselves in a position or in a relationship or some circumstance in life where we know I should really probably step in and say something to this person? I mean, they're about to just go off a cliff. Something is just going to explode here. They are making some bad decisions, or they've developed a bad habit, or the way they're, interpreting this situation is wrong, whatever it is, right? And we feel like maybe we need to say something. Maybe we need to step in and help, steer the ship a little bit. That's scary, isn't it? Again, just as much as we don't like to hear it, frankly, most people that I come across, they don't like to give it either, right? It can be awkward. There's a lot of fear involved, on and on and on. As we get to the end, and in fact, we're at the end of the book of James today. All summer long, some of you know, you've been here. We've been going through one of the letters of the New Testament called the book of James because it was written by a guy named James. It's about as complicated as it gets with the Bible. And we've been going through this letter from James, who was literally the little brother, biologically speaking, of Jesus himself. James writes this letter, and he tackles a bunch of different topics, but he keeps going back to one big idea. Again, if you've caught some of the messages online or you've been in between vacations and stuff, been here in church and you've heard some of them, you've heard me say it before, but his big idea for his whole letter, everything keeps coming back to this, is simply that when it comes to being a Christian, again, some of you have heard me say this, it's not what you say that proves who you are, right? It's what you do that proves who you are. That's what James constantly comes back to. He wants us to understand that living a life of following Jesus is about putting our faith into action. It's about doing something with the change that has occurred with us, or doing something with what we've heard, and then by God's grace and his power, actually living it out, right? Living out a changed life. And so that's what we've been talking about all summer long. That's what James talks about all through his letter. And again, he brings up specific examples and different topics and whatnot, but it all points back to that. And then he gets to the end of his letter, and he hits on this idea of talking to people, telling people, right, engaging with people when maybe they've gone off track, when maybe they've kind of made a bad decision, or they've steered their life in the wrong direction or whatever. And he's saying, you know what? This is actually part of living your faith out, is being willing sometimes to step in and be that guy or be that gal that says, can I help? I think there's something a little off kilter here. Now, it's just 2 verses. It's literally at the end of the letter. In fact, some of you know, when we've gone through this series, some weeks we've tried to cover a whole chapter because it's all connected. Like that chapter, from the first verse to the last verse, everything has to do with the same point that James is trying to make. So we said, well, we're just going to cover the whole chapter that week. Some weeks, and again, this is really based on not just my own understanding, but what scholars have said and theologians have studied and whatnot as they break down the book of James. There's some weeks where it's like 5 verses, right? And that's the one section. That's his next thought. That's his next idea that he's trying to talk about. So we just covered that. This week, literally, it kind of stands by itself. In fact, it's the conclusion for his whole letter. It's 2 verses. It has to do with this idea of if we're going to be serious about putting our faith into action, if we want to take James seriously, which is really just taking Jesus seriously, about what it means to live out a life of faith. James will say, you know what? I've got one final faith in action challenge for you. And again, it has to do with this idea of telling people, you've gone wrong. You've gone in the wrong direction. Now, I know that is like, some of us feel like, oh, we should never do that to other people. That's judgmental. Others are saying, well, yeah, I could see where that's necessary sometimes, but that is scary, right? I don't want to do that to someone. I don't want to be that guy or that gal. As we talk about it and we start to look at this idea from the Bible's perspective, my hope, my prayer is anyway, that we'll all walk away. It may not be any easier, but we'll all walk away saying, James is right. This is important. And hopefully it'll make sense why he put this at the very end. Why this is kind of his conclusion to this whole amazing letter that he wrote some 2,000 years ago. So let's just look at the two verses. It's right there at the end of James chapter 5. It says, my brothers and sisters, if one of you should wander from the truth and someone should bring that person back, remember this. Whoever turns a sinner from the error of their way will save them from death and cover over a multitude of sins. Now, James is just making a statement, right? It's not like, you need to do this. Or, hey, guys, you've been messing up, you need to do. He just makes this statement at the end of his letter. Now, let me read it to you again. My brothers and sisters, if one of you should wander from the truth and someone should bring that person back, remember this. Again, this is the last thing he writes in his letter. This is it. This is the whole conclusion. Whoever turns a sinner from the error of their way will save them from death and cover over a multitude of sin. It's a statement, but it's his final challenge for all of us who are trying to put our faith in action by God's grace in our lives. And again, ultimately, it's all about him and what he's done. James is not writing, hey, you know what? You better start getting your act together. You better start following the rules. You better start doing certain things so God will love you and save your life. It's not how it works. It's the exact opposite. James knows, just like all the other New Testament writers knows, God saves us by his grace. God sent his son Jesus to die for us, do something that only he could do, that we could never do for ourselves. And because of his grace and his grace alone, if we would receive that into our lives, we're forgiven of our sins. We're made new, we're made whole, we're made complete in Christ, and we'll spend eternity with God the Father in heaven. All because of what he's done. But James says, if you've accepted that gift of grace into your life, it should change you. You should live a different way. You should walk out, again, by his grace, his power in you, and you won't ever do it perfect. You'll make mistakes, but there should be a new trajectory for your life because of that grace you have received. And now he goes through all these things in his letter. Okay, this is what it means to put your faith in action. This is what it means to put your faith in action. This is what it means to put your faith in action. We've talked, about watching our mouths and the impact that our words have and meeting the needs of the poor and needy in our world, right? How to respond to our circumstances and our problems, especially when people purposely create problems for us, right? People who mistreat us and abuse us, and how do we respond to that in a godly way? All those sorts of things, right? That's what James has been walking us through from the first pages of his letter, the first couple sentences of his letter, and then he brings that all down to this one final, here's your challenge. Here's your faith in action challenge. If someone wanders away, you would do really good to help bring them back. It's really important for both them and you to bring them back, to help them get back on track. Now, before we go into this, in case some of us are new to the Bible, which is totally okay. If you're like, man, I don't know Jesus from a swear word, I just showed up here this morning, right? Or my wife drugged me in, or this or that. That's cool. We want this to be a church for everyone. And that's awesome. But if you don't have any kind of context for the Bible and maybe what James is really getting at here, I want to just explain quickly the theology around these couple of verses. Because at face value, you could read what James says here and says, is this what he's saying? And then draw some improper conclusions. It's just easy to do, and it's no big deal if that's where you're at. So let me, before we really talk about how this applies to our life, what in the world this has to do with us this morning, let's just talk about the theology of these two verses. First of all, James isn't talking about those, when he's talking about those who wander, who never believed in the first place, who aren't followers of Jesus, who aren't Christians. It's not who he's talking about. He's talking about people who were there in some way or another who said, yeah, I'll check that box, I'll get in that line, I go to church. Whether they lived it out or not, they were at that place in some way or another, right? And they've wandered. Or maybe they still check the box and they go to church and they get the form in the mail and they still mark Christian, but they're really not living it out. They're really not putting their faith into action. That's who James is talking about when he says those who wander. Now, hopefully you know, if you've been part of this church any length of time, we love, love, love people who don't know Jesus. That's why you start a church. That's why we started this church a few years ago, is to help people who don't know Christ yet to know him, to know his love and his grace and the amazing goodness found in Jesus. It's life-changing. It's everything. And God has blessed us to encounter all kinds of people on different places of the journey, whether they totally love Jesus or not. But man, we certainly, part of the vision and mission of this church is to help people in addition to everything else that we do and all the other people we connect with. It'll always also be to help people who don't know him. And James has the same heart, for sure, I can guarantee you. But he's specifically saying here, For those that were there, for those that checked the box, for those that said, yeah, I'm a Christian, that's my thing, and they're not living it out. Whether they ever did or not, I don't know, but they're not now. He's addressing those people. Remember, James's focus throughout his whole letter is our Christianity isn't proven by what we say, but by what we do. And so he's saying, gosh, if you know people, if there are people around you that have wandered away from their faith, they're not living it out. Yeah, maybe they still check the box, but that's not really who they are. You need to go after them. That's who he's addressing. I just want to be sure we're clear on that. The second thing real quick, and I think a lot of you probably already know this, but spiritually speaking, you and I can't save anyone. God saves, we don't. So when James talks about you save them, there's issues with translation there. There's issues with context. You have to understand the bigger picture of the New Testament is so clear. You and I don't get to do that. We have no power to do that. Only Jesus has the power to save. Only Jesus has the power to take a broken heart and make it whole. Only Jesus has the power to set someone free from their sin and forgive them. We don't save anyone, but God allows us by his grace, and I don't understand why, and I'm just grateful that he does. He allows us to be a part of it. He says, come on, I got a job for you to do. I want you to be a part of my redemptive work. So spiritually speaking, again, let's make sure we understand. James isn't saying we go save anyone. We can't. Only God can, but he lets us be a part of that work. And finally, just real quick on the theology side, it appears that maybe James is saying we can lose our salvation. We can lose that free gift of relationship that he offers to us through his son Jesus. That maybe we can wander away from that and that we're no longer saved, right? If we were there once, but we choose not to be there anymore for whatever reason, whether consciously or not, but by how we live our lives, then you know what? Deal's out. It's all null and void. Some people think that's what James is saying. Others would argue, well, you know what? If you don't really know Jesus, if you're not saved now, if you're not in that saving relationship where you've accepted his grace into your life, his forgiveness into your life, right? If you've walked away from that, you never really did it to begin with. That was never really the truth to begin with. Really smart theological types have debated those two options for hundreds and hundreds of years. Probably maybe over 1,000 now, I don't know. And I don't know the answer. Seriously. Some of you will call me a heretic for that. I don't know. I could make a great case either way from the Bible about both of those two options. And James is certainly saying some things here that make us struggle with, well, can you walk away? Can you walk away from your salvation and lose your salvation? Or were you never really saved to begin with if you don't follow Jesus anymore? I don't know. I don't think James really cares. Frankly, I've come to a place in my life, and again, some of you, heretic, oh my gosh, I grew up in the church, and my pastor always said, that's fine, but I'm not sure I really care. Because you know what I know the New Testament cares about in every line? Where you're at right now. God cares about, are you in love with my son Jesus right now? Do you follow him right now? Because that's where true life is found. That's where joy and peace and wholeness is found. We can spend years debating about whether so-and-so, walked away from the church 10 years ago and whether or not they are really saved. Who cares? Let's go get them and bring them back because that's where life is found. What does it matter at that point? James is saying you need to be on mission and go help people come back. That's where it's at. That's what true life is all about, which leads us to why James is ending his letter this way and what it has to do with you and I. James isn't like random here. He's not throwing out just random thoughts and, okay, well, now I'll end it this way. I just thought of another topic I should have covered. Maybe I should have done chapter 1, but now there's a flow, there's a plan here. Most theologians, again, who've studied this say, yeah, James, he had a point and it was very strategic, and he ends very specifically with this. It's his final command for those of us who want to try to put our faith into action, and it's this. It's to help others put their faith in action too. It's his final put your faith in action challenge that he gives us. And very strategically, he places it right at the end. You want to put your faith in action? You want to take Jesus seriously? You want to go like all the way with this deal, right? Yeah, serve the poor. Yeah, watch your mouth. Yeah, respond in a godly way to the circumstances you face and the problems you face. Absolutely. There's a lot of ways you can put your faith in action. You want to go all the way with this? Help others put their faith in action as well, especially those who have wandered, those who've gone off track, those who've said, nah, I'm done with this whole Jesus thing, church thing, or maybe they think they aren't done with it, but the way they live their lives is totally contrary to what it is. It's his final challenge. And I think if we want to take this challenge seriously, We have to ask ourselves a question. Now, again, I know for some of us, you're not at that place where you're like, well, I'm just trying to figure out if I believe in Jesus, right? You're telling me about going after people that have kind of lost faith or walked away from the faith. Cool, this is, not necessarily an all play. Just sit back and kind of reflect on all this stuff. But again, for those of us, if you're, I want to go after that. I want all in. I want to follow Jesus in every way, by his grace, by his strength. We need to ask ourselves this question. Do we love each other enough to tell each other the truth? That's the application of this verse, because here's the thing. You can read the end of James, right? Say, okay, that's interesting. Great. Okay, I get it. James he's like this fanatical Jesus freak and great. And he tells us all these things we should do to put our faith in action. Okay, great. I'm going to go home now and have chili. That'll be next week. But I'm going to go home now and do whatever. How do we know, how do we actually take this step? If we want to take Jesus seriously, we want to take James seriously here, how do we start to live this out? The final two verses, his final faith in action command. I think we have to ask ourselves the question, do we love each other enough to tell each other the truth? Because James is saying, when we wander, and to some degree, in some way, we all wander at some point, will the rest of us say, let's get them back. Let's get them back. Life is found here. Peace is found here. Joy is found here. Let's get them back. Jesus is where we all need to be. Do we love each other enough to get past the fear and the awkwardness and the inconvenience of having some of those tough conversations? Do we love each other enough that when those we love are responding to their problems in an unhealthy way, we reach out to them? We talk to them about it. We try to provide some answers. When they're pursuing money and stuff over God and his ways, do we engage with them on it? When they're holding on to bitterness and anger rather than offering grace and forgiveness to those who've wronged them, do we say, that's going to kill you? That's going to tear you up. Let me help you choose grace. When they're making decisions that are hurting others, destroying their family, wrecking their faith, do we love them enough to sometimes even in a bold sort of way stop and grab them by the shirt collar and say, you're about to fall off a cliff, and I love you enough to say, stop, let me help you? Do we love each other enough? Now, I know this is hard. Again, what's the first thing we talked about? No one likes to do this. No one likes to be that guy or gal who gets in the other person's face, right? And sometimes it has to be that way. Sometimes it can be much more subdued. It's just situational. But whatever the case may be, no one likes to be that person. No one wants to be that person. No one says, hey, God, give me an assignment today where I need to go steer someone back on the right track. That'd be a lot of fun. You don't do that. It's not natural. It's all the awkwardness and the fear of rejection and the fear of people feeling judged by you and all those sorts. I get that. You know who did this really, really well? If you just I need a model for this. I need someone who just nailed this thing, right? They love people enough to tell them the truth, but man, they just did it in such an amazing way. Anyone guess who I'm thinking of? Okay, you're in church. The right answer is always Jesus, okay? It's always Jesus. Jesus did this beautifully. Jesus did this in a way, I get it, he's God, but he's our model for living, where he could tell people the truth and always do it in love. He could tell people the truth and not have fear and the walk away. Is he going to hate me forever now? No, he was at peace. Jesus is our model for this. And there's a verse in Ephesians 4 that says this. This is the Apostle Paul talking, but it's just, again, an expression of Jesus. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head. That is Christ. See, Jesus knew that people needed to hear the truth, that people would wander, that people would make bad decisions. We're all in that same boat, right? This isn't an us and them or a level 2 Christian versus a level 3 Christian. No, we're all together on this one, right? Jesus knew that. Jesus knew people had to hear the truth. Jesus also knew, and Paul knew, that for those of us who follow Christ, if we want to become mature in our relationship with Christ, we have to be willing to speak the truth at times. And Paul says that, but he says, speaking the truth in love. See, that's what Jesus did. It sounds simple, but that's what he did. His motivation was always love. And he always chose the most loving way to speak a hard truth. And so what I want to do for the next few minutes, again, if you're at that place where you're like, I want to take this seriously. This is new to me, or this is going to be hard or whatever, but I at least want to take James and Jesus seriously about what it means to live out my faith. And it looks like one of the final commands, put your faith in action challenges that James gives us, is to sometimes help steer people back in the right direction. I want to try that. I want to at least consider that, wrestle with that. Well, if that's you, I just want to give you a couple things to consider when it comes to telling hard truths to people the way Jesus did. Because again, guys, he's our model for everything. If you want to know how to do life, right? If you want to know how to have healthy relationships, Jesus, he's the guy. So let's just talk about a few things here. And again, if you're still at a place where I'm not sure I need to chase anyone down, I don't know if I need to be with Jesus, again, just sit back, chill, and keep asking those questions. And we appreciate that you're here. But number one, only speak into someone's life if you have the right to do so. First rule of taking this faith and action command from James seriously. If you don't have the right to get in someone's face, don't get in someone's face. How many people in this world, how many of us at certain times in our life have been turned off to faith, turned off to Christianity, because someone got in our face, about something with regards to our own faith, and they had no right to do so. There was no relationship there. There was no connection there. There was no trust there. See, I get it really easy. Just true confessions this morning, right? By you coming in this building and sitting in these chairs, you're kind of giving me the permission to tell you what the Bible says. And sometimes it's really hard, and we try not to shy away from any subjects in this church because we think the Bible has words of life on every subject. But I get sort of like this pass, I just get up here and just say it, right? You gave me the permission by coming in. It doesn't work that way normally, does it? You can't go stand on a street corner, and unfortunately people do. Hey, you're going to hell, and let me tell you about all your sins, and you're so screwed up, and blah, 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 blah. First of all, never mind. I won't go there. But we have to have relationships with people. We got to earn the right to be heard. Only speak into someone's life if you have the right to do so. So it starts with the relationship, but also you and I better be darn sure before we're going to call someone on something, before we're going to help steer them back in the right direction, that particular area of life is good in our own life. I mean, you've heard us talk about it before. Don't point out the dust in your brother or sister's eye when you got a big plank in your own. Who said it? Jesus. Again, you guys, it's really easy. Just say Jesus. You'll be right. Jesus said that. Dave didn't come up with that. His point is, you have no credibility and you will have no effectiveness in helping people turn back to life, helping people make healthier decisions. If you're like, hey, you need to stop doing that. You got that piece of dirt in your eye and you're walking around with a board in your own. Some of you remember, I think we talked about this earlier this summer, and I walked around for like 5 minutes with a board up to my eye, telling all you guys what big idiots you were, right? And it was funny because I was the big idiot. You guys were fine. I was making a point. Jesus was making a point. So we've got to have the right to speak into someone's life. We got to have trust. We got to have some kind of relationship going. Guys, I said this to the first service, and I mean this with all my heart. As a pastor, you get in lots of conversations where people are like, well, tell me what you think. Well, what do you think about that? What do you think about this particular area of my life, right? Ugh, dangerous, right? What do you think about this decision I just made? Okay, fun. Well, let me tell you. I always ask this question. If it's someone I don't already have a relationship with, someone I know there's not a level of trust already built, I'll say, do you really want to know? Are you saying you're giving me permission to tell you? Because you might not like what I say, right? And trust me, other people have had to say those sorts of things to me. So this, again, it's not a judgment thing, but you may not like it. But I always ask. Because if they really don't want to know, and sometimes they're like, no, I guess not. Let's have coffee first, or let's watch a game first together, and then maybe I'll let you speak. And that's good. That's healthy. Because you got to have the right to do so. Okay, that's I think the first rule of speaking hard truths the Jesus way. Number 2, if you want to follow along still in your notes, your motivation, my motivation must always be the other person's good. If you ever are thinking, man, I'm going to kind of set this person straight, or I'm going to show them how they've gotten off track, or I'm going to call them on this particular bad choice or habit, right? Stop and say, what is my motivation for doing this? If it is anything other than their own good, stop. This won't go well. You won't honor God, and you really won't help the other person. Because our motivations always come out eventually, don't they? People eventually see through what we're really trying to get at. If you look at someone, you're like, person is so annoying. I wish I could find something to knock them down a couple of pegs, right? And then you find it, you're like, oh, great, I can do it, you know? Don't do it. That's the worst motivation for trying to correct someone, trying to bring someone back to Christ, try to get them back into living out their faith. No. But if our motivation is, I don't want this person to destroy themselves. I want this person to know the life that I've experienced. I want this person to know the grace and the hope for their life that I've discovered for my own. I mean, if those are the things that great, go for it. God will use you, I guarantee it. But if it is anything other than a good, just keep your mouth shut and say, God, change my heart. A lot of times we try to call people on things because we're feeling bad about ourselves. We're not feeling like we're doing all that great in life, so we're like, hey, I got to knock someone else down around me so I feel a little bit better and let them know that they're a little bit lower. Come on, let's be real. That's often our motivation. Sometimes it's just bitterness. We want to get back at someone. They hurt me one time, or they called me out on something one time, and they just think they're all that and know it all. So I'm going to put them in their place. Our motivation always needs to be good, for the other person's good, or just keep your mouth shut. Have you ever learned this lesson in marriage? I have. And that's all I'll say, because that's all I get to say. I don't have permission to say beyond that, but I've learned this lesson many times. Okay, finally, last one. You and I need to cover every conversation we have of this nature with grace. Every time you and I feel like God's saying to us, you know what? Put your faith in action right here. You're the one in the right position to help steer this person back, to speak words of life to them, to help them to see where they're about to go off a cliff and get them back. You're the guy, you're the gal to do that. Every time that comes up, our first strategy, our first line of thinking should be, how do I show this person grace? How do I communicate to this person that we both stand before the cross exactly the same? People need to know, because it's true, right? That we're just as screwed up as the next person, that we've got as many things to work on as the next person, that we are just as in desperate need of God's grace because we're a human being as the next person. And so everything we do, if we want to take James seriously on this final put your faith in action command, we have got to start with grace. Every conversation has to be covered with grace. And you may not say it like this, but essentially what it comes down to is, you know what? I love you enough to point you back to the cross. I love you enough to help you see that we all stand equal before God's throne in need of his grace and mercy. That's where I live. Every day I get up, that's what I'm asking for again. God, bring me back to the cross, bring me back to that place of grace. I got to be there if I'm going to keep walking this thing out. That's where it starts. And if we approach these sorts of conversations with grace, right, the Jesus way, God will use you. God will help steer people back. It may not be in that moment, may not be in that week or that month, but trust me, if your motivation is for their good, right, and you have a right to speak into their life, and it all comes down to grace, we just need God's grace. We're all in the same boat. We're just coming back to the cross together. God will use it. It's James' final command. It's the final thing he tells us in this incredible letter of how to put our faith in action. One last thing. Help those who've gotten off track. Help them start to live out their faith again. Because that is everything. And what we're going to do this morning, as we do at the end of every teaching series that we do here at I-90, is take communion so we don't forget it's all about grace. It doesn't matter what the series is. Anything we talk about in church, and the Bible covers every topic under the sun and all kinds of very life practical, we'll talk about marriage sometimes and parenting sometimes. We'll talk about, sharing our faith or maybe helping the needy or whatever, right? All kinds of things. It all comes back to what Jesus did for us. We only have the power and the strength and the grace and the freedom to live out that stuff and do that stuff according to God's ways and make a difference in this world because of what Jesus did for us. And so again, it doesn't matter the series. We want to end and say, let's forget before we walk out those doors. Don't forget. The only reason we even talked about this thing in the first place, the only reason we studied James in the first place, the only reason we had a little ditty on marriage in the first place is because of what Jesus did for you and I some 2,000 years ago on the cross. So if you've never taken communion here on a Sunday morning at I-90, real simple. We're not into a lot of pomp and circumstance. It's just basic. God's just looking at our hearts anyway. So what we have is a couple of tables in the back where you can go during this next song. Ethan's going to lead us in one last song. You can sing along if you like, whatever. But if you are at that place where you want to celebrate this morning, you want to thank God this morning for the gift of Jesus and what he has done for you, you can go to the back and take communion. And as simple as just taking the cup, it's a little grape juice, take a piece of cracker, eat and drink it. You can do it back there. You can take it back to your seat. It doesn't matter. It's an expression of our thanksgiving to God. It's an acknowledgement of what he did for us and that this all goes back to grace. The cup just represents Jesus spilled blood for us. The little piece of cracker represents his broken body. And we recognize that's what he did for us so that we could live. So Ethan's going to start leading us through a song. If you want to take communion this morning to give thanks to God for what he's done for us, that we might be able to live out this life of faith now as a result, you can go back there at any time, take communion. When the song's done, we'll come back together and I'll pray. All right? Let's pray. God, what other response would we have to something so amazing, so sacrificial, so transformative than what you did on the cross for it? What other response could we have than to offer up our lives to you? To say, God, you call the shots, you run the show. I need you. What else would we do? You did everything. You did what we could never do. You made us right with yourself. You paid the price for our sin. And God, we thank you for that this morning. And God, may we not just thank you with words, but help us thank you with our very lives. Help us to live this stuff out. God, help us to get up every morning, look to you, look to the cross and say, I need your grace again. God, fill me with your strength. Fill me with your power. Fill me with your mercy. Fill me with your love. That I could go out and somehow, again, because of what you've done, shine your light. I could go out and somehow, because of what you've done, I could make a difference. Somehow I could go out because of what you've done and help someone who's wandered away from that great, glorious gift and help them come back. So God, if we've got people in our lives right now that we need to speak that life into, help us to do it. Give us the courage. Help us to do it your way, Jesus, and certainly not our own. And God, I just keep praying that we'll be a church where people find you, where people come back to you, and where the hope and the joy and the peace that comes from knowing Jesus would flow through these walls and lives truly be transformed as a result. So Jesus, thank you again for what you've done for us. We celebrate you today. And God, help us to walk away from this place changed. Again, not because of what we can do, but because of what you have done for us. And it's in your mighty name we pray. Amen.